Okay, all right. So, hello everyone, and thanks everyone for coming. Um, I'm glad to see this because I know I have a famous presenter in the other room, and I didn't know how many people would actually turn out. Um, yeah, for those in the back, there's still some place in the front. I will probably show quite a bit of code and demo live. I'm not sure if you. I'll try to make it enlarge it and make it visible to everyone. But if you want, there's still time to move a bit forward. I'm from Germany, but I don't bite, so don't be afraid. Uh, yeah, thanks for the organizers for having me here. This is the first time I'm speaking in this part of Switzerland, and actually glad I made it. Yesterday I made the mistake that I traveled to Locarno instead of Lugano. And I found out when I arrived at the train station that my hotel is not actually in walking distance, but I was able to get here with another train, so I'm finally here and I'm able to deliver the talk. Now, I'll be talking today a little bit about IDEs. This is probably something that most developers will have a certain form of experience with. This is basically the tooling that you use every day. And talk a little bit about how these things evolve in the last couple of years, what kind of new options come up with like cloud and container-based environments. So before I go into the detail of that, that's me. My name is Matthias. I work for a company called Novatec in southern Germany. We do a lot of like custom software implementation, modern software, cloud-based, cloud-native stuff, microservices, with a strong focus on a JVM based languages, but also different ones. Besides that, I am also a lecturer at two universities in the area of distributed systems. And distributed systems is a bit of a gray old term, so I'll try to teach like distributed systems with modern technologies to my students and guide them a little bit into the direction of how distributed systems are being used nowadays with polyglot environment, container-based stuff, and so on. And this was also initially the root of this talk. So why this talk? Um, in the end, in this lecture, but also very often in a client environment, we build as an overall application with distributed components, with different kind of languages. We have freedom of choice nowadays in a better way to say, I want the right tool for the right job. Container technology added the thing to it to have like a consistent API to run those, and then Kubernetes is all around to make this high available. So this is kind of a thing that I want my students to build over a semester, but it also very often looks like in client environments that we do. So we have event-driven things. Of course, we need to embed security, have APIs, have web-based front ends, and so on. And this is what I think of distributed systems in a modern world. So one of the lab tasks is what I say, please build some kind of an application that exposes an API, pretty simple thing, for example, a shopping list or a to-do list or whatsoever, and then build another component with a front end, then talks to it. And basically realize that the important part is not the actual programming language itself, it's more like having a clean API definition, good error handling, and all those things. And then I ask multiple people to say, do different teams and build different front ends and different back ends, basically fulfilling the same task, but being able to say the API in the middle should be consistent. So you should be able to swap in and swap out the components, and everything should still work and run. And that, of course, imposes a bit of a problem for the students to say, how should I develop that? What kind of build tools, what kind of test tools, what are all the things that I need? And finally, I say, okay, container technology is also important. Please provide container images or container build mechanisms, compose file, so that it's going to be easy for me to run and evaluate and test all the things. And finally, say, okay, Git is something we use very often, so put all the code into a common repository, which is easy for me to access. So Venkat was speaking about code reviews this morning. We do a lot of code reviews there to reflect and see what are the things that what are good, what can be done better, and basically all learn from each other. Now, when I do that, of course, learning all the stuff will cause problems, will cause issues. So things we see are issues with programming skills, container skills, CLI or operating system skills, remote debugging, and local development environment setup. What do you think? On which one are we spending, or I should say, losing most of the time? Yeah, I mean, it's the last one that was correct. It's also kind of easy because my talk title implies that. But this is a very unfortunate thing. I mean, I have a lot of international students. Then they have keyboards in all kind of languages, which is often very hard for me. And sometimes I just lose an entire session to get like a JRE set up to make an application work. Or then people don't have administrative rights to run a Docker daemon on their local machine. And unfortunately, we never really get to those problems on the top where I would want to get. This is what I want to teach them. So I would want to get rid of this and say I would like to have a consistent environment for everyone that I know they have the same conditions and I can try things, and if it works for me, I know it would work for somebody else as well. And this is of course not only true for a university thing. This is also in a company. If you onboard new team members and you want to get them up to speed quickly in your development team, or if you want to roll out a certain environment for people to test and access things, pre-build that and say, okay, I can make sure they're doing the same thing and the test results are actually valid. This can be a great help for the quality of your application. So what I want, of course, is I can write clients or students or whoever to connect to an IDE or a shell and have all the same conditions, because different environments will bring different results. If 10 different people build the environment in the same instructions, you will still end up with probably 5 to 10 different environments, because there are always little glitches and things that are getting forgotten. So from there, they should connect to like GitHub or any other Git repository, to a container registry like Docker Hub, and have all the same conditions. Now, in the last 2 years, this changed with the arrival of GitHub Codespaces and Gitpod, because they kind of delivered exactly the things that I was looking for. To say the environment where the application is being built or tested is not on the people's machine, or not necessarily. It can be run somewhere in the cloud, and it can be built from a certain template where I can guarantee it's going to be the same one for everyone. And in there, I can have polyglot language support. So Java frameworks, Python, JavaScript frameworks, whatever else. And as it's running in the cloud, we can easily also expose the APIs and test them. So it's not like localhost testing or whatsoever. It's really on the web, and things are being tested in a place how they should be. Additionally, what they also provide is support for Docker and containers. So it's not necessary to install that and run that on your machine and consume all the power on your machine, but also have this being running remote and somewhere else. So this is kind of the thing that I want to talk about today. Just briefly, for those who haven't worked with it yet, I'm not a seller of this technology, so I don't get any money for talking about this. Um, there are free trials which give you I think, about 40, 50 hours a month or something like that. So it's definitely not enough if you're a full-time developer to get everything for free, but it's certainly enough to play around with a few things every now and then, like what I am doing, and not to hit the limit in there. So when I just quickly ask, who in here has been working with GitHub Codespaces? Not so many. Who has been working with Gitpod? Also not so many. And Devpod probably not even a single one. This is the newest one of all these. So yeah, I will try to introduce and say, okay, these are the things that they have in common. Here are the differences, and what are the things you can actually get out of it. Let's start with the GitHub one. And if my internet connection works well, I will try to do the things live. So I am now on my profile, and I'm going to create a new repository. So this is all from scratch. There's nothing pre-set up, and say Vox Ticino, and just add a README. And I guess most of you have seen something like that. So now I'm in an empty repository. So most of the things will probably look the same for you in your browsers. You probably don't have this button here. This is a custom browser extension, but this one you will have. So normally you would get this URL here. You can clone your stuff, but now there's this Codespaces thing, and you can say, I want to create a Codespace on main. What that will do, it will now create a container somewhere wherever GitHub think is right, and start a Visual Studio Code in browser that gives this front end to me. I will try to make it a little bigger. So this, so I hope this is fine. So it will say, welcome to Codespaces. You are on the default image. It includes runtimes and tools for Python, Node.js, Docker, and more. So if I go in here and say Java minus version, I can see I have a Java 21. I have a Python environment. I have Docker and everything around. And this is not on my machine. So this is just, I'm using this for free and it's running somewhere and it's pointing to this repo. So let's try to get something done. In an honor of Josh, who is speaking in the next room, I will create a Spring Boot application. So I would say curl start.spring.io. This should actually work. Wait, let's just do it right. Okay. So normally you could get this on the web page, like in the Spring initializer here, but I'm going to do this right from the. So you can see the problem if you have too many tabs. It doesn't really look a lot different, so you might have trouble to find your IDE. So I'm going to say curl. I want to get. I'm going to copy and paste this and say, what do I want? I want a type Maven project. And as starters, I want a web and actuator project. So I hope I'm not doing anything wrong. So now I'm getting a zip file. I'm unzipping the file. And you can see now I'm getting all this structure here in my directory. This is now still in that container. It's not pushed to the Git repo yet. So if I forget about it, it's gonna get lost. But anyway, I can go there now and say Maven Spring Boot run, and it will hopefully build and start my application. Now that this is a fresh environment and a new container, it of course doesn't have any Maven cache, so it needs to download all the things in the first place. But it is actually running. And it's also noticing that we have now a web application that's listening on port 8080. If I say open in browser now, I get a public URL and my application. There's no code inside, so it can't do much than displaying an error message. But I can go to the actuator and see, okay, my application is actually there and it's working. So starting from scratch with about 2 minutes, I can stand up an application and expose this to public. Now, looking back at this thing that I just built, so if I say now, okay, I want to first draft, I'm gonna commit and push this. So, and if I refresh here, this is now all in my Git repo. I still see in that Codespaces tab, this one is now running. This is our live instance. And I could also say I have different options here. So I can say I can connect and open this in a Visual Studio Code. What I have done before is using the Visual Studio Code in a browser. I can also use my Visual Studio Code that I have here on my local machine if I prefer that. This will now connect. You can see that down here when it says opening remote. You can almost see it down here. That it's now connected to this code space. And if I open the terminal here, I can see who am I. Make this a little bigger. this is the container which is running in the cloud. So if I do like a touch file, I say touch from VS Code, it's going to create that file. And if I look into the browser version right here, I can also see this file has just been added. So both of the environments are pointing to the same container instance where I'm currently working. Now, going back to my slide deck, and I'm getting a bit into a mess with all my open presentations here. This is what we have done. This is technically how that works. So somewhere in the cloud, Codespace would create a container on a virtual machine. Under the hood, we will know that GitHub has been acquired a long time ago by Microsoft, so it's running somewhere in the Azure cloud. And in that container, you will have the clone of your repo, the languages, the tooling, and everything that you want. And you can connect from Visual Studio Code in the browser or locally. You can also connect from a JetBrains IDE, I'm going to show that in a second, or also from command line. So if I open my local command line here, so this is like I am on my machine now. If I type correctly, am I? This is me. And if I check my code spaces, then it will tell me I have a couple of code spaces available. This is the one that I just created. And now it's SSHing into that. And now I'm also in that code space. So I'm seeing the file system here, and I can contribute there too. The third option, or what probably most of the developers are interested in, is the using it with IntelliJ. So IntelliJ has, or like JetBrains has this gateway. And with this gateway, I can connect my IntelliJ to various environments. And one of them is Codespaces. So it lists all my code spaces here as well. This is the running one. And now I can say connect. This will bring up my local installation of IntelliJ and then also point to this environment. So technically speaking, there's a pretty broad coverage of the tooling that you are able to use. And so whatever your preferred tooling is, you would get all the features out of this tooling. The difference, of course, is that the environment in which the tooling operates and runs can be customized before. So you can definitely say, I want this JRE, I want this Docker runtime, I want this Python environment, and so on. And hence make sure that everyone that is using it that way has exactly the same conditions. I mean, there is this 12-factor thing called the Devpod parity to say basically how closer I'm developing in my target environment, like the more effective it is, because it's like the test results are definitely more qualified because I'm already developing in the same way where I'm later on running. In the same way here, you create like a dev parity that you say everyone who's using and doing that is having the same conditions. As you can see, this one takes a bit. The JetBrains gateway is also still in a beta state, so this is not recommended for productive usage. In the end, it will come up, but for not losing any time, I will continue a bit with my presentation here. Also, we have 25 minutes still, so we're good. If you have any questions on the way, feel free to raise your hand and interrupt. Yes. Yes.
When I write code
Yeah.
in container from IntelliJ,
Yeah.
I'm writing in the container locally in sense of input lag.
No, you're writing, you're having the thing in the container. So you can put the code in there, you can build and test it there, but as it is like based on a Git workflow, by the end you have to push it to the repo. I mean, containers normally, unless you specify it different, they will live for 2 weeks. So by any means, within 2 weeks, you should push your code at least once. But the question is absolutely valid. It will not be persisted forever on your file system. So it really is in wherever this container is being hosted, there it's being held for the time being. I mean, sometimes it's also that you might not want to push your code. You might just want to try out something. And you use that container and said, okay, it works, and then I throw it away again. So for example, I don't know who just saw that LangChain for J session from Lisa before. I just fired up one of those instances with her GitHub link, and I was able to build that straight away. So I don't want to really have that on my machine forever, so I just throw the container away, but now I know this works in the way that I want. So yeah, very good question. There's another one there.
Hi. Um, just wondering if makes sense to spin multiple code space. Let's say we are developing a front end and back end product, which are in two different repos, and somehow we need to test the client side by hitting the real implementation of the backend repository branch. Is this a case which is a feasible case, or better to isolate by mocking maybe from the front end the back end API?
Well, I would say both are valid cases. I mean, with mocking, you get probably a quicker result, just if everything compiles and runs in that way. But the second thing that you said is definitely true, and we also see that very often, especially in my university lecture. So the students, they code it at home, and then they bring it up in a local environment, and then all their tests work very well as long as everything is localhost. But as soon as the components are really distributed, and you, for example, have an HTTPS connection, then suddenly the backend will throw CORS exceptions and things like that, which you normally don't get if you develop everything locally. And in that case, of course, it will prepare you better for a real-world scenario than just mocking things in that way.
So is it possible, like, let's say, a sort of compose?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
I hopefully will come to that in the remaining time. So anyway, you can see here we have now the IntelliJ up and running. So also this IntelliJ is in the same container environment. So if I open up code and say, okay, here's my source folder, here's the POM file, and this is the application code, I get pretty much everything that IntelliJ normally gives me. The problem here is this one takes a bit more resources. So the default container that Codespaces or Gitpod normally provide will come to a let's say a limit here at IntelliJ. I will do another one in a second to show you with an improved configuration that this one reacts a little bit faster. Technically speaking, it does that thing. I mean, you should now. It's the first time that I started this. I would have to do like adding a configuration here and pointing it to the right JDK, which is basically one which is in the container. So I can say I want a new configuration. Let's say let's do a Maven configuration. And here in the Java options, I will see detected the SDK21, which is present in that container. And I could configure that now and do my development tasks there. So I'm not going to code anymore in this side now because I have some more things to show, but we can come back to this in a minute. So here. There were some things that you didn't see because I've been setting it up before. So if you the first time connect GitHub with Visual Studio Code, or same with Gitpod, it will ask you for permissions. You of course have to authorize that, but that's of course pretty straightforward. Now, one of the things that I want to get into is a bit of the support matrix of IDEs, Git repos, and underlying providers. So with Codespaces, it's pretty clear that it's from GitHub that it will require GitHub. The underlying cloud is Azure, and you have seen we have coverage of different IDEs that can connect to that, either browser-based or local ones with Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ. There's also a Jupyter Notebook, so that's kind of what they offer. Now, Gitpod has a bit of a similar thing, but a kind of a different pitch. So Gitpod in itself is not a Git provider. The product of Gitpod is really that cloud-based environment. That's also their marketing pitch, where they say, okay, in the near future, so and so many environments will be only based on that. I'm not sure if this is true, but certainly something which helps easily to get started. Now, this is just a screenshot as you saw before. So this is from the Visual Studio Code in the browser. So if I develop Java here, I have all the things with like my code checkings, automatic suggestions, and linting and all that stuff. I was demoing this on a Java user group yesterday, and I got the feedback that I didn't really go into the specifics of an IDE feeling. And I mean, the general answer here is your IDE behavior doesn't change. So if you have been using Visual Studio Code before, or IntelliJ before, everything you know from there is going to stay exactly like it was. The only difference is that the environment underneath is something you gain control of, and you can configure the way you want. So now this one also pitches a bit more into this support space. So we don't see only GitHub. We also have GitLab and Bitbucket, and we also can specify which cloud the instances are being provisioned on. Technically speaking, this one doesn't matter because you don't feel or see that anyway. But connecting to different providers is certainly something which is nice. So if I go on Gitpod here, sorry, I'm going to log out for a second to show you this. So this is how it looks like when you go there. And then you need to come and bring, like your entry ticket is an ID in either GitLab, GitHub, or Bitbucket. And once you do that, it basically will be able to access all the repositories you have access to. So you can see these are the ones that I have been working with recently. I just told you I was using this LangChain examples from the previous talk. Here I have plenty of repositories from my students. This is the end of the semester, so I have to review all their stuff. And so this makes it pretty easy for me that I have individual dedicated things where I can just look into. And as you can see, after 2 weeks, they're going to be thrown away. So I can just show you this one real quick. I'm going to reopen that. So again, this container has now stopped in the meantime, so I'm restarting it. And so this is not my code repo. This is like another one's code repo. And I can just go in there and say, what did we see before? There was this Spring Boot example. And I can just say maybe Spring Boot run here. And this hopefully should start this application. So as you can see, it's now not downloading all the dependencies anymore because I have done this in a half an hour or an hour ago when I was watching the talk. That also means those things in the containers will be cached. So this is about to start, and now we see that command prompt here where I can actually try to enter things. So let's say, how are you doing? And oh, I'm getting exceptions. I didn't test it all that way. Let's see what's going wrong. Insufficient quota. All right. Well, this is pointing to my ChatGPT subscription, which is a free one, so maybe this is not possible there. But anyway, I mean, for just the sake of trying some other code quickly and playing with it, this is just really, really easy to do. And now if I say, well, I want to go further, I can do that. Otherwise, I can just go and throw it all away again. All right. So what else do we have in that Gitpod space? Just look. So I have my dashboard here again with all the things. So this was, for example, the environment I was demoing last night at the Java user group. And I think, if I'm not entirely mistaken, this one I used not with built-in browser, but with IntelliJ. So we'll see that in a second. But yeah, as you can see, if you are in a role like me that does too many things at the same time, this can come in handy. If you have one certain project that you work on all the time, I think a local IntelliJ is still unbeaten, especially for JVM-based development. But playing around with different things or other scenarios that I'm going to show you later on is something that will certainly help. So now I'm in this. Again, you have this dialog box here. So this time I have a bit of a stronger container. with more hardware underneath. So things should actually work a little better. And now if I'm in my IDE, I can of course just say, okay, I want post mapping, so I'm getting all the completing things. If I go into my POM XML, it will give me the option to edit my starters. So as I said, everything that you're used from standard IDE is something that you can continue doing here. So it's not like that you trading something or swapping something out. All right. Any more questions at this point? One in the back.
Hi. Is there a way to collaborate in the same container?
Yes. I mean, I had this question before. Also, is it possible to do like mob programming or things like that? I mean, this is pretty much what I showed before in that Codespace example, where I was pointing different things into the same container. And once I do a change, even though it's not committed and pushed yet, everyone will see that change. So technically, this is possible, and you can connect multiple like IDE instances pointing to that same container or running in that scope. How much it makes sense, I don't know, because I mean, you're getting into that point where one person can override immediately things from the other. So it will definitely require a lot of discipline on your side, what the tooling will not provide. The concept of the tools are based on Git workflows. So of course, it might make more sense to have using the same repo, but letting everyone have his own container, and then do branching and pull requests and merging and normal like workflow stuff. But if you want, technically, it is possible, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that for example, peer programming and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
pair programming and like direct review and things like that, you would be able to do that.
Yeah, and another question, what about secrets related to your project?
Um, I will come to. I mean, give me an example.
I mean like private keys and so on, something that you store privately inside your machine
Yeah.
without developing.
Things that you don't want to put into a public Git repo, for example. Yeah, you can use the of course the GitHub and GitLab have security mechanisms. So for example, if you run a GitHub action for a pipeline and you push a container somewhere, you can also put your secrets into there and reference it like this without having it exposed somewhere on the web. This is the way how you would go there. The other question, which is kind of tied into that, how does it actually work if your project is not on GitHub or on GitLab? If you have like an internal repository, then you won't be able to use this. This is basically would bring me to my next topic, if the question is answered with that. Okay. Now, yeah, we've seen this. 10 minutes, that's good. And the new kid on the block kind of is called Devpod. So if you go on that website, they have a pretty clear pitch who they are competing with, or what the concept of it is. So in the end, as I said, Codespaces and Gitpod are kind of tied to a certain range or to individual providers, and they are all cloud-based, and not everything is open source. Now, Devpod comes with the idea to say we support a big range of IDEs, we support an even bigger range of Git providers, and we also have the configuration of the underlying environment. So Devpod is not providing you all of that. It's more like turning you into your own provider. So what does that mean? I can say, I install this as a client app on my machine. And then I can say, I have, for example, maybe a Kubernetes cluster somewhere, or some VMs, or some local Docker daemon. And Devpod will basically start this container in one of these environments and then link it to the IDE. So you are in charge of providing the underlying resources on your own. But that also means you can point it, you don't have to point it to a public Git repo, you can point it to a Git repo which you have just cloned into your local file system. that would also work. So if you want to develop something in-house or like which is not accessible by public and use your own resources, that would basically be the way. So this way you could bring up your own Gitpod or Codespaces like feeling within a company firewall or something like that. The thing is just this is not as mature as the others. So the other ones, they have like an advantage, let's say, of 1.5 or 2 years. But I think there's some pretty high potential in this one. So if I bring that up here, so I'm gonna hurry up a little bit. So I have the various providers. I have configured 3 from my own. So this is my local Docker environment on my machine. This is a Kubernetes cluster that I own that I have access to in Azure, and I have a couple of VMs there as well. So if I want to create a workspace, I can now say I either put a public link in there, like for example, the one we've just created, if I ever find it again. So this was the one. I have too many windows open, but I can't do anything about it. So this is the one we just did. And I want to say I want to run this in my local Docker container, and I want to connect to that with the Visual Studio Code in browser. So I'm just going to say create that workspace, and it's going to bring that up. And while it's doing that, I can show you this maybe on my shell. So this is in the, so I can say Docker PS, and actually 17 seconds ago, it brought up this container. And now we're also getting the link, and you can see here from the link, it's localhost because it's my local daemon. So this is basically being forwarded to my container, and I'm now the own host of this environment. So kind of my private, my mini private cloud. And I can do the same thing, for example, in a Kubernetes cluster, which is pretty appealing to many of the use cases that we have. So for example, what we do very often is providing trainings. So we provide trainings to our clients for Docker, for Kubernetes, for programming languages. And we also have that problem very often to say, how can we make sure that everyone has the same access to that environment without installing anything on an own machine? Because very often, like clients are limited by regulations, or they have firewalls and things like that, and we just want to make them an easy access to get to things. Now, if we provide those containers in a Kubernetes environment and we spin off as many as we have students, then we can also say, go sure and say they have all the same environment, and we can provision it very easily. So, for example, here I can now say I'm going to create a new one. I'm using the same. This is wrong. I'm using the same, where is it? Git repo, and this time I'm going to use this Kubernetes cluster. And as I create workspace, then it's going to try to reach out to my Kubernetes cluster. So I have to provide the kube context, and you can see here now it's going to run these commands. So for those familiar with Kubernetes, I can show you this real quick. This is the access to my cluster. I have here a namespace which is called Devpod, and this is now creating that container for that environment. And while my Docker daemon was running remotely, this Kubernetes cluster is running somewhere in the cloud at Azure. And of course, this has higher built-in high availability features than a simple Docker daemon. And so I could easily spin up plenty of those and easily clear them off again afterwards. And the same, of course, would be working with the virtual machine approach. All right, so I'm trying to come to and here now my browser is also joining in. So they will look very identical. So this is like the one running on the Kubernetes cluster, and the other one would be running on my Docker daemon. Okay, to wrap things up, and sorry for this jumping around here. I'm getting lost in my own environment. So what I didn't show you much yet is about how to customize those images before you use them. In the part of Gitpod, it provides a thing called Gitpod YAML that you add to your code repo, which Gitpod will kind of read out before it starts a container, where you can do some initial tasks or also define an image, like pre-build an image that you want the things to work in. So I created my own image where I installed my desired versions of Java, some command and extensions, things like that, and I'm using that all the time. So I already know the environment that it's going to give me. For Devpod and Codespaces, they have a more, probably even better, generic approach using the standards of dev containers. This was kind of brought up by Microsoft over the last years, where you can define in a JSON structure how your dev container should be looking like and what should be the container components inside. So which Java version? Do you want a Docker in Docker? Do you want even a mini cube? Also, what kind of extensions would you want to have on your Visual Studio Code? So you can describe everything in that, and whenever the container is getting started, those configurations will be loaded. And of course, everyone starting this container will have the same configurations. So I think this is pretty powerful, and maybe Gitpod will support this in the future too. From a perspective of Java, I mean, this is the environment that I use most. You of course have the flexibility of clients, basically IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code. You have in the standard image you have SDKman installed, and from Visual Studio Code perspective, you of course have all the plugins which are available there. So you can tailor it all the way that you want. With IntelliJ, this is still in beta, and also this is not going to work with the community edition. So you need the ultimate edition to get all those features. That's why I normally try to pitch things in my talks only which are free. But yeah, people developing Java, they're going to ask about IntelliJ anyway. So maybe most of you will have that already. If you're developing in that space, then you're good to go. Yeah, for those people that have their own shell and are happy to have their own shell, this is of course something you can customize in the same way for your environment. So you can say, I want the bash, I want the C shell, I want a fish shell, and I want to configure it, for example, with OMAD ZSH or fuzzy the fuzzy finder. This you can do whatever you want in there, and then basically provide you this experience whenever you start up such an environment. With Docker, you have Compose, you have standard Docker. You can also use build packs or other mechanisms to build your application, basically everything that a containerized environment supports. And yeah, so from the scenarios, I already mentioned a few. I guess not every one of you will be teaching at university and have my special kind of problem here. But things that you probably might have is providing a templated environment to multiple clients. So as I said, we do this for our trainings. So far, we provide a VM for every student or for every participant. In the future, we're most likely going to replace it with this technology. And if you have that single template, you can roll out the same behavior and basically the same idea to everyone using that, thus making sure there will be no deviations in a local setup. This is probably the most common case, that people are not working on one individual project and have to switch every now and then. Also, you might want to try out new things like I have just explained before. This is basically also the number one use case for me. So if I see any new technology, I say, okay, do you have a GitHub URL? And then I can dive into it if it's really, and yeah, hopefully this approach will make developers in a way that they provide clean repos where you can dive in and start quickly. And again, once you don't need it anymore, you just throw it away. All right, I have 18 seconds, so that worked pretty well. If you want to connect to me, I'm still in that kind of dying bird network, but also probably LinkedIn will be better to get in touch. I will be around the entire day also for the beers event in the evening. So if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me. Do we have time for one or two questions now? Yeah? Okay. So if you have anything quick, please.
Thank you for the talk. And so if we have two different repo,
Yeah.
the question before, how there is an example, or maybe we can have a mail exchange to, let's say we want to use VS Code to spin a Spring Boot application and a Angular
Yeah.
front end, and we want to actually um, have the two projects working together.
Yeah, I mean, if you develop them individually, that's in independent repos, that's kind of probably the right way to do it. At one stage, especially if you use Docker Compose, you have to bring them up you have to put them in the same context anyway. So one of the options would, of course, be that each individual repo would build the actual container image and push it to a registry. And then the container, like the Docker Compose file, would be able to pull the two different images from the registry. So let's say you want to try the Angular one within its own space, then you would put the Spring Boot one from the container registry. Another option would be to say you create another repo which basically pulls in the two repos as submodules and configure the submodules, and then use them to bring up the build of both things and run them more tightly. So that would be the quick answer. Other things we probably have to figure out in more detail, but it certainly works.
Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Okay, great.
Thank you.